Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Long Game podcast with me, one of your hosts, Jason Osborne, and my much more famous and taller co-host, Ben Scallon, which counts for a lot in this world, wouldn't you say, Ben?
Yeah, it's weird when you look at the number of world leaders in various, major countries that tend to be on the taller side. That obviously it's some kind of weird evolutionary thing where you want the chief to be able to batter people over the head with a club. Even though that has no relevance today, you could be literally 4'1" and be a perfectly adequate leader. But for some reason, people
this would be for a topic in and of itself, which is nor did they speak about how a bizarre number of sort of great men, or at least would be strong men, seem to be on the short side. I mean, now, I know people say that about Napoleon. You've obviously got modern historians coming along and saying, well, actually, he was perfectly reasonable height for the time. But then, obviously, people will cite people as diverse as Alexander the Great to Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. So I don't know what to make of this.
Actually, weird Napoleon fact that people may not know. He actually had a country Colchi accent, basically, because he was from Corsica. So I don't know what a Corsican accent sounds like in French, but he got bullied in school because he sounded like the French equivalent of like a Kerryman or something. And so the Parisians were all like, ooh la la, and then he was getting picked on because he sounded like this bogger effectively. So I quite like rural accents, but apparently in society he got that he was on the receiving end of quite a bit of abuse for that.
Well, speaking of the receiving end of a decent bit of abuse, let's talk the presidential election, which is what we're going to devote the entire episode today to, because naturally we're coming out a couple of days after it, so there's been time for the dust to settle, and we obviously have opinions on it, and I'm sure our viewers do as well. But where do you want to take it first, Ben? Because there's a lot to it. Catherine Connolly wins, record spoiled vote, which a lot of people are very happy about, and I imagine many of our viewers amongst them. So where do you want to take it?
Yeah, I suppose it'd be worth, first of all, acknowledging, obviously, Catherine Connolly won fair and square, and fair play to her for that. We have a new Uachtaráin na hÉireann. She is very clearly of the left. Not quite the victory that many on the left are claiming it is. You'd have them thinking that the entire country had swung towards far-left socialism, and that's untrue for reasons which we'll get into. And one of the reasons why that matters and why it's important to point out that that's not true is because the government will be doing a lot of soul searching over the next while and doing analysis and trying to figure out where did we go wrong, what should we do in future to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen. And if the narrative that the whole of Ireland decided to back this far-left candidate because everybody is turning far-left, if that takes hold, then they will be more inclined to gravitate towards that kind of politics, which is the exact inverse conclusion that they should be coming to. Because, as we've pointed out on Twitter many times, and as has been discussed widely, it was the lowest turnout ever in a presidential election. And some people will say, oh no, it wasn't, because the last time in 2018 was technically lower. That's only true if you include spoiled ballots as part of the turnout, which is obviously absurd, because when you spoil your ballot, what you're saying is, I'm sickened by this election. I hate all the options that I'm being presented with, and I am protesting the entire system and saying to everybody on the ballot, you can kiss my ass. That's the message. Well, sorry, go ahead.
It is. No, I was just going to say it is funny because a lot of, say, just Connolly supporters, it seems to me, will say in the same breath that obviously it was a brilliant turnout, and then at the same time, when they'll include spoiled votes in that in order to justify that position, and then at the same time they'll turn around and talk about all of these spoiled votes as being invalid and being a waste. So you can't have it both ways.
Yeah. So she won an overwhelming majority in an election where the vast majority of people did not vote. An unprecedented number of voters chose not to turn up at all. And a significant portion of the ones that did spoiled their ballot out of protest. So in terms of the overall electorate, only about 25% of people or so cast a vote for Catherine Connolly. Does that mean she's illegitimate? Does that mean she's not the president? No, it doesn't mean any of that. She is absolutely the president. She won the election. There's no denying that. But a quarter of the public actually wrote in behind her. This is not some kind of seismic shift towards radical left politics on the part of the Irish public. Most people were either apathetic or sickened, was the bottom line that we should take away from this.
Yeah, I mean, the presidential election was always going to be, as sort of has been, because as we outlined in our last episode, Catherine Connolly was in many ways sort of the continuity candidate with President Higgins. I mean, there was a lot of fear over the fact that you might have a radical leftist, and that was reflected in international headlines, certainly that I saw over the weekend, or there was a lot of fear amongst, onlookers that were like, oh, Ireland's after electing a radical leftist president. It's like, where have you guys been for the past 14 years? Like, the guy who was in office wasn't all that much different in terms of his opinions.
No, Jason. Michael D. Higgins is far right. This is the glass ceiling has been broken now.
Yeah, that's it. But I think the presidential election was always suited to something like a left-wing unity candidate. It's really easy for the left-wing parties to row in behind someone like Catherine Connolly, say. At least it seems to me, as someone who isn't of the left, to put it that way. So it was always going to be very easy for them to maximize votes on their side, I should say. Whereas the rest of the field is just so scattered and fragmented at the moment. And just what you were saying about how, if this narrative gets out there about how if it is taken that like there's a surging left-wing vote, it's obviously going to be sort of some incentive for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil to sort of go chasing that. I mean, they couldn't do more chasing if they tried. I don't know if you saw that clip. I thought it was really interesting insight into the blindness in Fine Gael in this instance. David Quinn was in with RT Radio along with Minister of State Emer Higgins. And David was essentially making the point that Fine Gael has chosen to leave a load of votes on the table, implying like people like him. He was like, he was clarifying all afterwards on social media. He was saying, even if they don't like, he doesn't know, no one is being unrealistic and expecting them, say, to, row back on abortion or anything like this. But there's a load of things they could do that loads of people could get behind and that would win them lots of votes, which is like, cutting down on immigration, going bullish on free speech, all of these different things that would be attractive to voters who I'm sure many of them who chose to either spoil their votes or not turn out in this presidential election. And he was making this case to her, and Brendan O'Connor, I think, was the host, and he was saying, so would you say that Fine Gael has essentially gone too woke for you? And he was saying, yes, absolutely. And Emer Higgins took huge issue with this. She was essentially saying that's a load of nonsense. How did she phrase it? People want a party, or they want politics that move with society. And it's like, clearly they don't. Fine Gael has moved with society for the past 14 years, and look where it's gotten it. It's like they're doing horrendously by former standards in opinion polls, in elections, and then as was pointed out elsewhere, their candidate in a three candidate technically ballot. Their candidate still managed to come third place between herself and Catherine Connolly in a number of the constituencies around Ireland. Spoiled votes coming ahead of her in a number of places. So if they don't wake up this time, I really find it difficult to see them waking up at all. I mean, you've kind of got lip service being paid to that notion by Simon Harris and by the odd TD here and there, but you get that after every sort of electoral bomb in recent years.
Yeah, I hate to say it as well, because I don't want to get personal, and I'm sure Heather Humphreys is a lovely lady, and you don't want to kick people while they're down after they haven't lost an election. I'm sure personally she's lovely. I don't know the woman, but
I'd say she's delighted the election is over, just to say, like, the whole thing seems so uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, last year she said that she was too tired, which is her right. She's been doing it a long time. She's got grandkids and so on. You want to just settle down, and so I'm sure she's delighted to be on the other side of it. But I will say as well, like, the performance left a lot to be desired, shall we put it that way. I just to give one example, I was marveling. I was talking to my wife about this. We were watching some of the debate clips in the final week, and I said, if this was an absolute beginner who'd never spoken in public before, I'd go, I don't know if this person can be trained. I don't know if we're going to make it. And this is somebody who has been a cabinet minister for 10 years at senior government level and has been a politician for much longer than that. Just to give one example, in the final debate, she was asked at the very beginning, why are you a superior candidate to Catherine Connolly? Why should we vote for you over her? Which is the easiest softball question you could possibly be asked. That's the freebie. That's where they just give you a nice free shot. And
it's literally like asking, give us 3-4 good things about you.
Yeah. And so I'm watching the clip, and it literally takes about 30 or 40 seconds for her to get to any reason at all. Like, she's not a good reason. The reason she gave wasn't good. She's waffling. She's saying things like, and I'm sure there's a lot of people at home who are watching this who are wondering why there's so few candidates on the stage, and we're kind of wondering that ourselves. And the thing is, we're living in a country that's, and you're like, are we going to get to a reason here? Like, why should I vote for you was the question. And so she's waffling, just kind of saying nothing. And then at around the 40-second mark, she goes, I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother. And so I want my children to grow up in a better country. That's why you should be the president of a first world country? That's your reason? And then she starts talking about like credit unions or something. Awful, horrendous. Like, if somebody ran up to you on the street, on Grafton Street, and shoved the microphone in your face and said, why would you make a better president than Catherine Connolly? You could crap out a better answer off the top of your head with no prep. Like, I'd literally come up with something better right now on the spot. So again, I don't say that. I don't want to be mean. I'm sure she's a lovely lady, but it was just pathetic. Like, Fine Gael deserved to lose. It was an awful, awful performance, and that was not an anomaly. That was not like a one-off kind of. I mean, like, there was the whole thing about fox hunting, where she kept getting asked, "Why did you refuse to support the ban on fox hunting?" And she said, "Well, look, it's a rural pursuit, and people have done it for a long time, and I support rural pursuits." And so she was asked, "Yeah, but like, do you not think it's cruelty to animals?" And she goes, "Well, it's a rural pursuit," and da-da-da. And she repeated that like 500 times. Like, that was the only answer she had. The only rural pursuit we saw last week was rural people pursuing your party with pitchforks. That seems to be the takeaway from the entire electoral experience. So, yeah, as I say, basically all of that brings me to my ultimate point, which I've been saying, and I got some pushback for this, but it's true. The left did not surge in this election. Fine Gael and the government just collapsed and imploded in on themselves, and they left the field open for the taking. It was such an abysmal performance. We saw in 2018, between Michael D. Higgins and Leonie Reid of Sinn Féin, the left got, basically they got about 900 and... Sorry, I've got the figure here. Oh yeah, so 916,000 votes was how many votes the left got combined in 2018. This time they got sorry about this. This time they got 914,000. So anyway, the point being, there were no extra left-wing votes. If anything, the left-wing's total vote share went down. But the government's support base abandoned them, and so they just caved in. That's effectively what we've seen here.
It is extraordinarily interesting. I mean, one takeaway I have from this is that I'm really interested in how, political messaging works and the ability to sort of, saturate a marketplace with your message and things like that. And, you always get this every 4 years or so, in 4 years or so, exactly 4 years, you get this in the US where, the machine goes into overdrive in terms of the candidates in the US election getting their message out there. And you can generally say at least a couple of things that each candidate is about. We're obviously not American, but I feel like this is sort of quite well done in the US, regardless of which candidate it is, although in recent years that might be somewhat challenged for people like Kamala Harris running and things like that. But anyway, it's all to say that this was the opposite of that. Despite us being political junkies, I don't really like the phrase, but I suppose you could term us such. I don't really know anything more about Heather Humphreys after this, other than that she has pets and she likes giving out ice cream when she's canvassing. I feel like that she started as a kind of, and I don't say this to be mean, but really this is just, it seems like an objective analysis of the thing. She started at 0 and kind of finished at 0. And there was nothing other than, those a few little factoids, as I mentioned, in between. Whereas Catherine Connolly, I don't mind saying I think a lot of her positions are abhorrent, but I do think that she at least stands for something. I can disagree with what she stands for, but she at least stands for it. I mean, obviously there was some terrible footage came out of her Kill for Connolly event there last week. I think the event was just before the election. But nevertheless, she kind of honed in on the kind of traditional Irish aesthetic with like the typeface on her posters and things. There's some discussion about that on social media, about the way the typeface is kind of reminiscent of Irish storefronts and things like that. Locking down on the Irish language, locking down on sort of, Irish music and things like that. All of that was absent from, Heather Humphreys' campaign. She was trying to go all in on this kind of like, I'm just like one of you. I have my kids and my grandkids, and I love nothing more than having the sweet drawer with chocolates in it for my grandkids. And it's like, good for you, but that's a perfectly good reason for you to go away and enjoy your happy little life, not for you to be president. So I do feel like why Connolly won is obvious, and we didn't do official predictions before the election, but I'm sure that if you'd asked either of us, we would have been pretty comfortable in say, as pretty much everyone was, in saying that this was Connolly's to lose. Heather Humphreys was going to very likely to underperform what was already estimated to be a poor performance, and that spoiled vote. If I had to put a number, being honest, if I had to put a number on the spoiled vote percentage, I would have said something like 8%. So that seriously exceeded my estimations, and maybe we should talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it ended up being 12.9%, which I was shocked by. I didn't think it would be anywhere near that high because, as you say, I was thinking maybe the polling said 6%. I thought that's probably low. It's probably going to be maybe exactly as you say, 8 or something. And I said to a friend of mine, Janie Mack, imagine if it hit 10. Wouldn't that be mental? And we were kind of speculating about that as sort of like a weird, kooky alternative timeline. Imagine if 10% of people spoiled their ballot, and it ended up being almost 13%. So that was astonishing. And I did think it was kind of funny that we had the Taoiseach before all of this transpired, when people were just upset about the Maria Steen thing. They were saying, basically, we need to reform the presidential nomination system so that it's easier for people to get on the ballot. And he was kind of like, no, there's no need for that. It's a perfectly adequate system. It's worked every other election cycle, and I don't see why we would need to change it now. And then after the brutal ass kicking that was received, he said, maybe we need to take another look at that and blah, blah, blah. So Connolly even mentioned spoiled ballots in her acceptance speech. So for all the people who said, oh, spoiling your ballot is useless, it won't do anything, you're wasting your time, why is it featuring so heavily then in the RTE coverage? The Taoiseach's talking about it, the Taoiseach is talking about it, the victorious candidate is talking about it as she accepts the victory. Evidently, it had a major impact on the entire trajectory, and it will be part of the story of the election when this is recorded in the history books.
I would just interject as well to add to that point, which is that people keep talking about how it doesn't matter, oh, you threw your vote away, and yet people were so upset about this on social media, about the spoiled vote things. I saw the full range of reactions to it, but sort of my personal favorite one was, people who were genuinely taking it personally. There were a whole load of reactions to this. There were people who were taking it really personally and saying, like, people died for your right to vote. How dare you essentially do this?
It got more and more hysterical. First of all, when it was at the very, very beginning, when the Spoil the Vote campaign was announced, they started off saying, you're going to spoil your vote? What an idiot. What a waste of time. What a joke. And they were kind of like mocking it. And then it progressed on a bit and it got a little bit more momentum. And they said, spoiling your vote is stupid. That's just going to go in the bin, right? Nobody's going to pay attention to it. And then, as you say, by the end of the whole thing, it had reached a fever pitch where they were saying, how dare you spoil your vote? People died for your right to vote. And this is how you repay them, you bastard, blah, blah, blah. And as I said on Twitter, the point of spoiling your vote is not to be disrespectful to democracy or Ireland's rebel heroes. It's to be disrespectful to you. Your enraged, infuriated reaction, red in the face, veins popping out of your neck as you're banging on your keyboard in fury. That is the exact reaction that the spoil the vote people wanted, because you're such a sanctimonious bastard that you expect to curate the presidential ballot down to the tiniest range of options available, both of which are largely in agreement with you and your worldview on most of the important issues, and you expect people to just shut up and take it. And so the spoil the vote is a way of saying, actually, I'm not going to take it. I'm going to bring the entire... It's like Bane in Dark Knight Rises, crashing this plane. We're just going to cause a massive electoral disruption and cause a historic landslide against the government that has done this to us. That was the entire sentiment behind it, and it worked. So for everybody saying it was this impotent waste of time, ha ha ha. That's the only thing left to be said there.
I do think it also testified. There's obviously, I think we've talked about it before, and there are studies on it that show that. And now, not to say that everyone who spoiled their vote is on the right, but I do think a lot of people who would classify themselves that way spoiled their vote. But there are studies that show that people on the right generally are better at understanding the perspectives of people on the left than vice versa. And I thought the whole rage at the spoiling your vote thing was extraordinarily revealing of the fact that people of the left in Ireland, you know, the variety of them that there are, can't fathom not having anyone to vote for in Ireland. Because I do think, again, we're not in the business of, you know, recommending to people how to vote. It's not our jobs. But I think people can tell based on, you know, who we are and how we think that we're probably quite dissatisfied with the options on not only this ballot paper, but general elections, local elections. My whole... Obviously, I'm living in Poland now, so I'm exempt from the voting, but I obviously continue to watch with interest. And it was only up until a couple of years ago that I was voting. And my entire adult life has been one of casting dissatisfied votes. It's been, now to be fair, I come from, as people might be able to tell from my accent, I come from one of the worst constituencies in the country. Dublin, Rathdown is mine. They obviously changed the constituency a couple of years ago. But I have Neil Richmond in mine. I have... Who else do I have? It was formerly Giuseppe Madigan's constituency. We also had Catherine Martin in my constituency. So it's one of the all-star stomping grounds anyway. Every vote for me has been an experience of trying to figure out the least worst option. If indeed there had been elections where there was only one person I could put down on it, because I didn't even feel like transferring my vote to anyone else, because I figured they were all sort of equally doing a disservice to the country. So I just say all of that to say that there are a lot of people in the country, I'd say, who have found themselves in similar positions, and this presidential election was a crystallization of that dissatisfaction, where you're literally faced with no one you can comfortably vote for. You are looking at a ballot paper and you're like, disagree with her, who's Jim Gavin? And that's what you're faced with. And the fact that so many people were unable to conceive of spoiling your vote in the face of that does go to show that people on the left always have someone to vote for in Ireland, even if they haven't ended up in government.
Yeah, I would very much love these people who make fun of the Spoil the Vote campaign. I'd love to transport them to an alternate dimension where the only options on the ballot were Maria Steen and Declan Ganley, and ask them, so who are you voting for? Because you're not going to spoil your vote, right? You're not going to protest. People died for your right to vote in this dimension. So you have to vote for one of them. You tell me which of those you'd prefer. Do you think that they would put up with that lack of options, or would they throw a fit and go ballistic and say this is fundamentally anti-democratic? We all know the reality there. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was literally just going to say it's a really good analogy. It is like if you're a person of the left, yeah, it's like being faced with a ballot with Maria Steen and Declan Ganley on it. It's like, what are you going to do in the face of that?
Yeah, and they'd go, oh, no, we're completely different to Fine Gael. We don't agree with them on anything. You agree with them on immigration, which is very important to a lot of us. You agree with them on freedom of speech or lack thereof, which is very important to a lot of us. Things like
gender issues,
social issues like abortion, which, believe it or not, some people still care about. A whole variety. In fact, when I say some people, I mean 1/3 of the electorate. All of this stuff, innumerable issues that you could name. So the fact of the matter is, people should not be expected to vote for things that they consider to be crap. And by the way, that is kind of what Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil rely on a lot of the case. In a lot of cases, they rely on people voting for what they deem to be crap, because they set these things up in such a way where they go, yeah, you might think we're bad, but the alternative is worse. Sure, she's a radical socialist. She's this, she's that. So therefore, we know you're going to come crawling back to us, and you're going to begrudgingly give us a transfer or give us a vote, to keep her out, even if you're not keen on us. And so the House always wins. We'll always get there in the end. And this was an election in which people said, actually, no, I would rather blow the entire thing up and see a radical socialist get in than give you the satisfaction of my vote having disenfranchised me and people who think like me. You can kiss my ass, sabotage on a mass scale by people just saying none of the above. I don't want any of you. And so the ploy, the gambit of trying to get conservative people to begrudgingly support candidates they don't want failed abysmally. And so maybe the message then, rather than thinking we need to lurch forward further towards mad progressive nonsense, is maybe if we want people's votes, we have to give them something that they actually want in return. Here's the thing. As we've said a million times, and as we will continue to say, it's not my job to tell people how to vote. I'm never going to say vote for this candidate, don't vote for that candidate. That's not my job. All I'm going to urge people and say to people is, don't give your vote away for free. If they want your vote, I don't care who they are, they have to earn it, not just with words, but with actions. When they start doing things that you want them to do, and they start actually catering to you as a voter, at that point you can say, now you have my vote, you've earned it. Not just because I'm going to keep him out, I'm going to keep her out, I hate you, but fine, I guess I'll have to support you because I'm a hostage in my own country and I have no other option. Don't give it to them for free. Make them work like a dog for it. And then maybe things will start to move in the right direction in this country. Because I'm sick of people giving their vote away for free. I'm sick of giving my vote away for free from people who never give us anything. When they're sitting down to do their policies, they're thinking about all these different interest groups. They're thinking, how are the carers going to respond to this policy? How are the farmers going to respond to this policy? How are the fishermen, the teachers, all of these different groups? They are going to have to start sitting down and thinking, how are the Conservatives going to respond to this policy? Do we have anything in our manifesto for the Conservative voter, the people who spoiled their votes to the tune of hundreds of thousands at the last election? Because if we don't have them on board, then we're getting nowhere. So force them to take you seriously as a voting bloc. That's the only thing I'm going to say. As I say, I can't tell you specifically where your vote should go, but this is the way we need to be thinking about these things.
Yeah, well, there are obviously hidden dangers following this election, which is that and they're similar to those that lay in the wake of the referendums last year, which was that after the referendum results last year, people mistakenly took that, and I said from the beginning, we didn't have the podcast then, but I certainly said it to the people that I was talking to at the time, that result did not signify a resurgent conservatism or a resurgent sort of right-wing sentiment in Ireland. That signified a government in a different manner kind of imploding, or more accurately in this instance, it was a government overreaching, sort of attempting something very socially progressive, overestimating the appetite for that, which again is a dynamic that you could sort of trace out in this presidential election in terms of the actual left-wing vote being much smaller than I think everyone assumes it to be in the country. But after that the referendums last year anyway, you had people assuming that, the right was on the up in Ireland, or that sort of there was an opportunity for conservatism here. And that isn't the case, because then obviously a couple of months later you have the elections, local, and then later in the year you have the general elections. And while turnout was disappointing, obviously Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are returned to power, and it's like they are on a general downward trajectory, but people were still willing. Like, for example, Helen McEntee, I keep going back to her, she is, at the level of national conversation, one of the most unpopular politicians in Ireland, it seems. And this isn't a reflection on her personally, but I rarely see a positive word spoken about her, if ever. Yeah, and yet she topped her constituency. So when it comes to, politics of the government, when it comes to, voting for councillors and TDs, what people need to understand is that we engage in Ireland in a politics of sort of petty kingdoms. People who are very good at getting things done for those who live in their area are always going to perform in elections, it seems to me. I have yet to see that dynamic refuted. That obviously benefits the bigger parties who have resources, who have connections, who are used to getting things done for their constituents. But for would-be challengers, because again, this conversation is taking place now in the wake, in sort of the wake of the success of the spoil the vote, and in the wake of the sort of implosion of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in this instance, people are again wondering, well, okay, where's the alternative here? And it's like, alternatives have to be about something more than opposition to immigration. That is important, opposition to just a wild approach to immigration, as has been the case over the here. But you have to be about more than that, because that's ultimately what's getting people elected around the country. And it's like, until you're able to offer some help when it comes to housing, doesn't mean you're in government and you're the one solving the housing crisis. But until people are able to come to you and say, I have this problem and I need help with it, or I need, at the very least, to feel like I'm being consulted, and that these words might be taken somewhere, I find it very hard to see any sort of breakthrough, I suppose, for any sort of right wing or conservative force in Ireland.
Yeah, I think that's true. And as much as we just went on a big rant about how the spoil the vote was hugely significant, which it was, and it had a big impact, which it did, it's also important to point out the limitations of it and the fact that it is not a substitute for an actual viable political movement. The comparison I would make with the spoil the vote thing is there was this SAS British Special Forces guy, and his job was to train people how to survive if you're captured by an enemy group. Like, let's say you get captured by an insurgent group or a cartel or something, and you're a captive, how to psychologically cope with that. And he said one of the things they emphasize is to get little small wins, no matter how small they are, to keep you going and keep your hope up. And so one real life example he gave was there was this guy who was captured by some group, rebel group or something, and they forced him to sign something like some kind of propaganda document or whatever. And after he signed it, unbeknownst to them, he had pocketed the pen lid, and he kept that in his pocket, and he gave back the pen, and they didn't want him to have that. And so they went away, and he couldn't do anything with it. It's not like he could use that to pick a lock. It wasn't in any way useful to him practically, but he had this sense of defiance, like, screw you, I got the pen lid. You wanted me to have it. You didn't want me to have it, and I got it. So it gave him this thrill, and that gave him enough kind of mental fortitude for a couple of weeks to get by.
Things like we can take. So, you finish your point before I interject.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, spoiling your vote and causing an election to explode is keeping the pen lid. It is it's important and it helps you, but it's not going to get you out of the situation you're in. You're still in captivity, you know? And a big thing that people need to realize is that the people who are thinking this way, the vote spoilers, are in the minority. You're not. I mean, there's certain issues on which you are the majority, like the immigration issue. We know that the vast majority of the public think that immigration is too high and so on. So on certain issues, absolutely, there is a popular majority there. But in a lot of ways, the people who are turning out to these protests and things, you are a sizable minority. That doesn't mean your views don't matter. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be taken seriously in a democratic system. You know, people, first of all, we cater to tiny fringe minority groups all the time. How many LGBT people are there in Ireland? It's infinitesimally small sliver of the electorate, yet we spend, it feels like half the time talking about their needs and wants. So just because you aren't in the ascendancy doesn't mean your vote doesn't matter or your interests don't matter. But people need to be realistic about that and think, how do you maximize your impact as a group wherein the vast majority of, or not the vast majority, but at least the majority of people aren't yet aligned with you or don't yet understand your perspective because you've been boxed out by the media and so on and so forth, you know? Yeah, it's you can do a lot with that. Like Nigel Farage never won an election, a general election in the UK. He's always been kind of on the outside of politics. He only just became an MP for the first time there a couple of years ago. And yet look at how,
I think it was last year even. It's just amazing how quickly time is going. It was only last year.
Yeah, actually, good point. And yet, despite being outside of the halls of power, he was able to move the Overton window massively as like kind of a political cattle prod, pushing people to achieve his aims who are on the inside. So anyway, I've kind of made my point there. I won't go on a big rant.
Yeah, well, I do think, because it's a point that we've made a couple of times, and I don't think our podcast has been alone in making it. I'd say John, Sarah probably done so as well, which is that you just can't substitute posting on social media or writing a defiant message on a ballot paper for hard work and for actually getting out there and doing the work of politics, which is, you know, meeting people, engaging with them. There is evidence that this is happening in places on a small scale. I thought one of the most interesting outcomes of the presidential election was the insanely high proportion of spoiled votes in certain Dublin constituencies. Places where I would say, now I don't have them in front of me, but I'm recalling from memory here, and I think I'm correct, like the National Party, say, have been doing a lot of like legwork and things like that in terms of community engagement and actually trying to sort of get something going. So I do think that there is signs of, like, you know, that it is, again, this is, as we said on one of the recent episodes, it's why we call this the long game podcast. It's like challengers to the status quo in Ireland have to become comfortable with the fact that they are settling in for kind of like a long haul. You can't be disheartened by the fact that, like, say the last general election yielded what seemed to many a disappointing result. You have to, like, take the good from these developments that you can and orient those, I suppose, in a direction that I suppose you feel is worthwhile. Again, this is just advice offered nearly in the sense that, like, there's so much complaint about the lack of political alternative, and it's like, well, here's how you go about getting political alternative, and these things haven't happened to this point. But I do think that what the presidential election did underscore is the fact that the political scene in Ireland is extraordinarily unsettled. That's the past couple of weeks and months, the most unsettled Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have looked in my adult lifetime, I would say. I think even more, maybe people would disagree. I definitely think it's more so than the 2020 general election, when obviously Sinn Féin sort of got their stunning number of seats on that occasion. But I do think that this has been the most turbulent time for sort of the status quo, for want of a better way of putting it. And I do think it's sort of outlining the shape of the future of Irish politics, which is where Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, if they continue on the trajectories that they're on, sort of just eventually, not necessarily saying it's going to happen at the next general election, but it will eventually become irrelevant, and you're going to have certainly a growing discontent vote. I say that even rather than right wing or conservative. And then you'll have the sort of consolidated left wing vote, I would imagine, which will become more consolidated in the face of that kind of disgruntled component in the electorate. So I think that there's a lot there to work with for people who would consider themselves dissatisfied, but it's precisely that. It's a lot to be worked with, not to just assume that things are going to play out a certain way. But maybe to posit a different course of events and something that I would be curious to get your thoughts on. Speaking of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil being unsettled, what do you think the chances are? Well, first of all, I suppose, how do you evaluate the leadership of the party's reaction to the election? And do you see any change coming from that? Because obviously, just to lay the groundwork, Micheál Martin currently, as of the time of recording, looking to be under threat, but nothing concretely manifesting itself yet, or at least not publicly manifesting itself yet. Simon Harris seems more secure than that, but he said that he personally seems, whether anything will come of it or not, who knows, he seems to be doing a little more soul searching. I mean, he's certainly posting a good game as he does, talking about how, we have to get rid of red tape and sort of get back to our core values. And it's like, well, you had 14 years to do that. But what do you make of it?
Yeah, I think obviously with Micheál Martin, as far as the leadership of Fianna Fáil, people are incandescent with rage within that party. And John McGuinness, the backbencher, who's the last Count Corla of the Dáil, he drew first blood, as it were, saying that we need a new leadership. And I think even people like John Lahart and others are now talking about the fact that we should possibly be looking at reevaluating our leadership. We need an evaluation, as Micheál himself would say. So that's obviously bubbling up, and then you've got Micheál loyalists. I have an article.
Can you imagine being a Micheál loyalist?
Well, this is it. I have an article coming where I compare it to mutiny on a ship in terms of mutiny, and he's got his loyalists. He's got like the cabin boy, Jack Chambers, and I don't know, I guess like maybe a parrot on his shoulder would be Norma Foley or something. I don't know who he would have around him, but the first mate, Dara O'Leary. But then you've got this other cohort who are trying to make him walk the plank at the point of a flintlock pistol. So anyway, we'll see what happens. But honestly, I don't know that will solve their problems, because who are they going to replace him with that is going to do something so radically different that it's going to save them? Like who is the obvious, what is the range of ideological difference within that party where it's like, oh, okay, we've tried it Micheál's way, let's try it this other person's way, and then we'll sort out all the issues that we're having. What is that other way? I don't know any of them that are proposing anything different. So you're going to just stick Jim O'Callaghan in there, and he's just going to continue with a slightly different personality along the same course, I would think. Obviously, I may be proven wrong on that, but yeah. So it looks, I wouldn't be surprised if they boot him sooner or later, but I don't know if that will help them as much as they think it will, given that the problem is systemic and party-wide. It's not confined to him as an individual. He is an emblem of a broader thing. And then as for Harris, as you say, I don't think he's in any danger, which is really surprising given what happened. But I just don't get the same sense that people are turning on him. I mean, his interaction with myself at Dublin Castle was quite remarkable, where he said he found it regrettable that there were so few candidate options on the ballot, which is, Jason, that's a bit like me telling you, I think it's regrettable that you got kicked full force in the nuts after I kick you full force in the nuts. I think it's a real shame that happened to you, Jason. It's terrible, literally the guy who did it. And he denied that, by the way, at the same press briefing. He said, oh, no, we didn't block people. We asked our councillors, do you want to nominate anybody other than Heather Humphreys? And they said, no, we love Heather. We're going to back her 100%. So we didn't send out an order from HQ. That's not what the RTE report says on the same issue. So unless RTE are responsible for misinformation now, I think we're looking at a bit of revision.
Wouldn't be the first time, but no, it's extraordinarily interesting. I mean, there is a genuinely astonishing lack of life in, the two largest parties in the country. One thing that really spoke of this to me was just prior to the election, might have been on Wednesday or Thursday last week. I even cringe to say it. A video from young Fine Gael that I don't know who drew this up and thought it was a particularly appealing concept or whatever. I don't know if you saw the video that their social media page put out where there's some girl sitting on the couch. Some guy calls the door holding a load of talking boards, or I can't remember the word for it now. He's holding these boards that are essentially like, will you? And then he swips it, vote for. And so they've got music on it going on in the background and sort of making this big deal of Heather Humphreys. And I was like, there is no one whose mind I find it harder to put myself into than an enthusiastic young Fianna Gaeler or an enthusiastic young Fianna Fáiler. I find it much easier to put myself into the shoes of like an enthusiastic young Catherine Connolly supporter. Funny enough, that probably says a lot about, me and my sort of radicality, I suppose, rather than it does about the state of politics. But I just find the fact that, like, even amongst the youth, the sort of the young people in the sort of youth branches of the party, that they're obviously coming up to an election, they're going to get behind Heather Humphreys, but I never heard anything from them about the fact that, like, there ought to be someone other than Heather Humphreys put forward, or the fact that we must have someone better than Heather Humphreys put forward for this. It's like they are completely bankrupt of vision and creativity, it seems to me. And it is, the word you used, I think, was systemic. It seems a systemic problem. And I do think that the immediate reaction to the results is evidence of that. I mean, the immediate reaction wasn't sort of, introspect and look inwards from most of the Fine Gaelers. It was instead to go back to tired old tropes. Like, I just nearly fell out of my chair when Emer Higgins said that I think that what this result shows us is that we have to get better at getting the youth vote. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I would expect a more clued in answer from someone who'd been blindfolded and had been wearing earmuffs for the past couple of months than that. It's just the most astonishing thing. And then you had Helen McEntee as well, essentially accusing the electorate of not using their votes properly, as though that's the winning message Fine Gael is going to go with in the wake of it. Like, I do think there's just a degree of bankruptcy there, and they don't know. There is no one in the parties that knows how to fix it, which is, maybe to outsiders, it seems amazing that might be the case, given there are so many people in the country telling them precisely how to fix it. But I think that it just speaks to the fact that these circles don't overlap all that much. I do think that sort of you have this cohort of people who, in the same dynamic as in the US, where you had the Democrats and Hillary Clinton who looked down on Trump supporters as deplorable, you kind of have the same dynamic here, which is where I do think a lot of the people in the political ivory towers and academic and media towers look down on the discontent and view them as backwards troglodytes, essentially. And are content. I feel like they have locked themselves into this dynamic where if they listen to them, they view it as defeat and surrender rather than as a triumph of their own morality over these people. And that obviously would be inconceivable to them.
Yeah, I think that the problem that they have is they still are chasing, and this has been made many times at this point, this is not like some earth-shattering revelation, that they're chasing an electorate that will never, ever, ever vote for them. It's like the equivalent of, you have a crush on a girl, so your way of trying to court her is by sending flowers to a totally different girl who has a restraining order against you. Like, this is the kind of mania we're dealing with here, that you're never going to be a more attractive option to a left-wing voter than the Social Democrats. Like, I would actually love to know the difference between the Social Democrats' platform of aspirations and Fine Gael's in terms of what would they substantially disagree on? What they argue about is one party's record over the other. They'll say, "Oh, you have done all these bad things in the past," but in terms of what they're trying to do now, there's no difference. Or Labour or whatever. So, yeah, no. Anyway, I completely agree with you, and I think this should be a watershed moment, and not in the way the left thinks it is. We were talking off air about how the left, Paul Murphy and them, are jumping up and down, acting like this is some kind of great, massive success.
Yeah.
This is not a massive success. Michael D. Higgins last time got 800,000 or so votes, and this is when he was competing against 5 other candidates. And then I think in the election before that, he got a similar-ish amount of votes, and he was going up against 6 other candidates. So you're talking about the vote being split 7 different ways, and you get about 800,000 first preference votes. Catherine Connolly was running against one terrible candidate and a zombie candidate who said he didn't even want the job and was only there accidentally. And she got 900,000 votes. Like, that's not so barely more than Higgins against a fraction of the opposition. Like, that's a terrible outcome. And yet they're jumping up and down, acting like the revolution is now. It's like a guy in a boxing ring who gets knocked out, and he wakes up, and due to brain trauma, he thinks he won, and he's running around bragging and popping champagne. Like, this did not, you won by default due to the atrocious nature of the opposition you're up against. That's not exactly some kind of watershed moment. And it was Senator Sharon Keoghan who said she thinks this will be the last election that the left win for quite a long time. I don't know if that's the case, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know if that's the case. Your boxing analogy does remind me of one of the most heroic comedic performances I ever saw. I don't know, did you ever watch Jackass when you were younger?
No.
I watched, there was one skit that they did in it where, you know, Johnny Knoxville, he's obviously famous outside of that even, where he did this like boxing in some shop with this like, I don't even know what he used to play, called Butterbean, but he's this huge slab of a man. And naturally, Butterbean absolutely battered him, and he was lying unconscious. I think he was concussed as well, and he had to go to hospital after. But the first thing he said when he sort of came out of his stupor was, "Is Butterbean okay?" As though, like, after inflicting massive damage to him. So I agree with you. I do think that they're sort of celebrating a Pyrrhic victory.
I mean, like, if the entire united left in these working class areas can't get, like, there were some areas where there were more spoiled ballots than there were votes for Connolly or Heather Humphreys, like, or any of the actual candidates. So these are areas where the left would consider to be their kind of main stomping ground, the proletariat, where you really want to get those people on side. So, yeah, not looking great. And by the way, I can't believe it's taken us this long in the podcast to say this. Does anybody doubt that Maria Steen would have run through both of these candidates given the opportunity? Like, can anybody be in doubt about that? Whatever you think of her, maybe you love her, maybe you hate her, listen to Maria Steen speak and listen to the other two candidates speak and tell me she would not have incinerated them into a fine dust. Like, it wouldn't even have been fair. But obviously that...
And I do think that, you know, and it's not... it's funny to see how it would have played out, because my gut tells me that Maria Steen, despite the fact that, like, you know, she is certainly very opposed to the political establishment. I mean, that was kind of her whole thing for putting herself forward, because she thought people wanted an alternative and they didn't have it. But I don't know why I have the sense that she would have benefited from, say, transfers from Heather Humphreys more than Catherine Connolly would have. I do feel that, like, say it had been a 3-horse race between Maria, well, you don't really know how to categorize Jim Gavin. He keeps saying a 3-horse race, and it's like he's just kind of lurking there in the background. but had it come down to like a race between the active participants of Catherine Connolly, Heather Humphreys, and Maria Steen, I don't know. I just sort of see the transfer dynamic as being either more favorable to Heather Humphreys or Maria Steen, despite the fact that they're very different candidates. I just sort of feel like the left remains kind of over there doing its weird thing, and it remains the case that that's very unattractive to, you know, people who aren't already a part of that camp. So in another world, it might have been very interesting. I did find Neil Steen's, assuming that it is his actual account, it seems to be on X. You see his post, but I put up a picture of his wife and said, "This is what they took from you," and I found that very funny. But yeah, that's another podcast in and of itself. As is, there's so many things we didn't even discuss on this week. The fact that you had getting my times all mixed up now. City West just a couple of days before the presidential election took place, and that I'm sure sort of crystallized sort of anger and sentiment.
I don't know this. I have no evidence directly to say this, but I'm going to guess that there were a substantial amount of people who said maybe they were going to begrudgingly vote for Heather Humphreys against Connolly to keep her out. And then after City West, they said, "I cannot stand over the record of this government. I can't do it." I bet you that was a sentiment that people felt, you know?
No, we left unmentioned. Someone felt so aggrieved over what we'll never be sure that they smeared their ballot paper in excrement down in Cork, which, all else aside, I'm very curious as to the practicalities of that. I mean, these aren't exactly, I mean, you're obviously given a private little space to cast your vote, but I feel like if someone shoved their ballot paper into their ass while they were standing there, you would notice that and maybe take issue with it. So I was like, maybe they brought some pre-made product in, not to you know, turn people off completely, but
and then wouldn't you smell it? Like, did somebody not say, like, why does this ballot box smell off? Like, there's something wrong here. You know what I mean? Yeah, I agree.
I'm so polite. It's like, this lad beside me smells like shit. But I'm never going to say.
I guess, you know, it might have been the same bag used on Anne Rabbit that time. You know, you never know. These things come full circle. Yeah,
there's an episode in and of the recurrence of excrement in Irish politics.
Honestly, it recurs every day in various forms. It just, you know, yeah. By the way, for the avoidance of doubt, people should not smear excrement. Like random poll workers who have nothing to do with the government's malfeasance have to then deal with that, and it's obviously gross.
This is an issue that's so pre-political.
Yeah,
so it feels ridiculous. No, because it's an issue that's so pre-political that it feels ridiculous even addressing it. It's like, this is the sort of thing your parents should have sorted out like 30 or 40 years ago, however old you are. And so it's not really the domain of political pundits to have to tell people that.
Yeah. If you have to come to this podcast to learn not to smear your fecal matter on the pieces of official documentation, then you've probably gone horribly wrong in
do you feel like people say about Gript is probably true, any true in that case?
But yeah, no. Unfortunately, we also didn't get to RTE's coverage of the entire thing, and the fact that they said that because the Argentinian election only got 64% turnout, which is still a good majority turnout, that shows dissatisfaction with the entire political system. But when the Irish election, just a couple of days prior, got 39% valid turnout, that shows an overwhelming historic landslide for Connolly. That's what we're to believe, apparently. So they outdo themselves every time, truly.
They do, yeah. Well, there's always more to be talked about, so we'll be disciplined and leave ourselves there. But we thank you all very much for listening in again, and we really hope that you enjoy it, and that if you're enjoying, indeed, we never say it, that you share it with someone who maybe isn't a Gript fan or someone who isn't a typical listener, because obviously what we do hope to do is, as it says on our website, challenge the consensus and things, and I do think that even making people aware of alternative talking points is a part of that. So anyway, we thank you for tuning in, and without further ado, we'll leave it there. God bless.
absolutely. And to keep up those rural pursuits.